आप सबकी सहमति से आगे की कार्रवाई शुरू करने से पहले मैं अफ्रीकन यूनियन के अध्यक्ष को G20 के स्थायी सदस्य के रूप में अपना स्थान ग्रहण करने के लिए आमंत्रित करता हूं। एक्सेलेंसी,
The Delhi presidency of G20 will go down in history for many reasons. First, it was a time when African Union, a group of about 55 African countries, got a permanent membership in the elite grouping of G20. India, Brazil and Indonesia. Indonesia having been the last presidency, and Brazil would be the next presidency of G20. So it was the first time that 3 consecutive years the presidency of G20 remained with countries from global south. Also, probably it was the first time when the global south, the issues of these smaller countries, issues of these countries which has long been neglected on global platforms, were discussed deeper and threadbare. Prime Minister Modi did arrange a wide-ranging discussion and consultation in a meeting called Voice of Global South that happened in the month of January, soon after India got the presidency from Indonesia in December 2022. The meetings that deliberated the issues and challenges, concerns and priorities of Global South, which has long been ignored in many multilateral discussions around the world. This time, with the inclusion of African Union as permanent member, somehow it gives the hope that now the Global South will have a permanent voice in G20 groupings and their needs will be heard. Also, interestingly, the wide divide that has emerged in the grouping because of continuous Russia-Ukraine conflict in more than 1.5 years, it has created a wide rift that could impact this G20 in a historic way. The joint communique, which normally comes after every G20 summit level talks, discusses what all transpired during the leaders summit talks, what were the areas where the leaders had an opinion and they got consensus. But this time around it looks little difficult because of 3-4 reasons. It is being talked that now Russia is not very keen to have those segments on Ukraine-Russia conflict included in the joint declaration, not even the same content that was very much part of Bali declaration in 2022, because Russians say that there has a lot of intervention since the last 1 year that has changed the overall geopolitical and geoeconomic scenario, and that is why the same content that were signed by Russians in Bali declaration would not justify the Western's intervention in the conflict. Now, debt restructuring is another area where the world, the leadership of G20 is trying to have some opinion because they want to have a huge fund created and mega restructuring across many multilateral financing institutions across the world, so that the financing for various sustainable development goals to the smaller countries could be given. China, which has invested a lot of money in the last several decades in Africa and many smaller Pacific island nations, is not very keen on having those contents. So probably we'll have to see how much of negotiations goes on those issues. Another issue has been on the issue of climate change, where the phasing out of coal has become an issue, while India is not very averse to the idea of having a wider discussion on climate change and ensuring that the aspect of climate change are discussed, the green targets that the world is set are achieved. But the practicality is that India cannot phase out the dependence on coal-based energy plants very soon, though it tries to bring down the overall energy consumption from the fossil fuel up to 50% by 2030. But it'll take another at least 20 years for India to completely get carbon neutral. That has been India's instance. So among all the concerns that the world is having right now, the Global South will need to be discussed. Their priorities could really be the food supply chain issues, the fertilizer crisis, the crisis or the soaring prices of fuel and short supply of food in the wake of Russia-Ukraine war especially, and how the world is going to ensure that these smaller countries which do not get much of a space in many diplomatic and multilateral platforms would get their essential needs met even after this discussion. While we see a lot of differences emerging between G7 and Russia, China, the group of G11 or G12 probably, who mostly contains of countries from the global south, would remain optimistic that the differences between West and Russia and China would not hinder the overall mandate and overall purpose of G20 gathering, which kind of tries to deliberate upon the issues and create a consensus how to deal with those issues, how to move forward on certain blocks. About 75% of the global trade happens among G20 countries and 60% population. Now with inclusion of African Union, of course, the population figure is going to increase. But that much of population remains under G20 grouping. So how can you ignore the overall aspect and the prospect of these countries and with the current G20 summit, Indian presidency is really having a tightrope walk on bridging the divide between the West and Russia-China, collaboration, while the G11 or the larger global South countries, they are looking ahead with an optimism that probably the differences would not hinder the overall consensus on key issues of climate change, food security, energy security, fertilizer security, development means by financing their climate change programs and ensuring that other aspect of their needs, their economic needs, their debt restructuring, they do get addressed during this G20 summit level talks. Japanese side have in fact assured India that they will be doing everything to bridge the divide between G7 and global South. Also, USA and other countries are interested in having India as a voice of global South if they want to counter the growing influence of China, both in terms of economy and a strategic leverage that China might take because of its economic investment over the last several decades in Africa and several other smaller island nations in Indo-Pacific. So here in the global South is also an urgency for the West and USA to counterbalance the Chinese growing hegemony in the region. So how will all fan out? We'll keep you updated on the issues that are being discussed in G20 in Delhi Summit level talks.